Hello and welcome to LSO's podcast. Today we are interviewing our principal bass player, Mike Swartz. If you're sitting in the audience and you look on the right-hand side of the stage, you'll see Mike, and you can always see his watch sometimes reflects the spotlight from the stage, and you always know that he's there shining with his double bass. Mike, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So you have been playing in the orchestra. We were talking about this just off mic a couple minutes ago. You just finished your 45th season with the orchestra. Tell me about the year that you started.
Well, the very first year that I played with the orchestra was actually clear back in the 1971-72 season. I was a senior in high school, and
Wow.
I auditioned for and was accepted into the orchestra for that season before I left to go to the Eastman School of Music for college.
And you were playing, I assume, in the section at that time. Who was the
Of
principal
course,
bass
yes.
player then?
Yes, George Work was the principal, and there were several players that uh, uh, aren't there now, of course. In fact, none of the players that are there now were there then.
Wow.
But it was just that one season. And then I came back in 1980 after I had finished college and had done some other things and came back to Lincoln and rejoined the orchestra.
Wow. So I want to start by just talking a little bit about the mechanics of your instrument. So everyone knows the double bass is the largest, instrument in the strings family. Your instrument has a special extension. Can you explain to us about your instrument and about what makes it unique?
Well, it's called a C extension, and it allows the double basses to play down to one full octave below the lowest string on the cellos. Quite often in earlier music, in classical and even in early romantic music, the cello and bass parts were the same. And since the cellos have a low C string, the basses could not go all the way down to that low C. Now, I need to explain that when I say we could not go as low as they, I'm talking about an octave lower than they.
Right.
The bass is called the contrabass because we read bass clef the same way the cellos do, but everything we play comes out a full octave lower than it appears on the staff.
So I think
So
finish,
go ahead.
finish.
Well, so when the cellos would go to their lowest possible string, we'd run out of notes. And the extension then, I can lock it off on the note E, which is the normal lowest note on the bass. But then I can also open that lock and go down chromatically all the way to a contra C, the full octave below the cellos. If you have ever looked at a piano keyboard, it's the lowest C on the piano, just three notes from the very bottom of the piano keyboard that we
So
can play.
when you're playing, is it normally locked or unlocked?
It's about half and half. It just depends. If the music is in a key that involves a lot of flats, quite often we leave it unlocked. But I also have now what's called the chromatic gates, which means I can open only the note that I need to open. If the lowest note that I need is a D instead of a low C, I can open it to that note and leave it unlocked at E, but open to D.
Wow.
And so this is a great advantage, but it's also quite challenging to remember which lock you've got on to make sure that when you hit that open string, it's the right note.
Wow. So tell me, what are the open strings of the double bass?
The bass has the same open strings as the violin, only in reverse. On the violin, the lowest string is the G, and the highest string is the E. On the bass, it's opposite. Our lowest is E, then we have A, D, and G. Just like a violin, a viola, and a cello. All three of the other stringed instruments have those three strings in common.
Okay. And so yours is just the opposite.
It's upside down because we are tuned in fourths instead of fifths. The gap between our strings is not quite as wide because the instrument is so large that if the gap were as wide as it is on other instruments, we would be shifting our hand up and down just to get from one note to the next, just to play a scale. So by having the strings a little closer together pitch-wise, it makes it a little easier for us to play.
A question that I've always wondered is how are the calluses on your fingers? Because those strings are so thick. Does it take a lot? Does it take extra pressure on the string versus the
It
other string
does.
instruments?
It does. You have to be pretty strong, actually. And it's one of the things that we work with young students all the time to develop right away is that if you hold the string down, but you don't seat the string, what we call seating it, it will still work, but it doesn't produce a really good tone.
Right.
So to play with a really good sound, you have to have like a vice grip fingers. And you do have calluses. They're not the kind of hard calluses that you would see like if you get a callus on your foot,
Mm-hmm.
but you can uh, if they go to take blood out of my fingertip, they have a hard time doing it because the skin is so thick.
Wow, that's so interesting. What is something that people would not know about the double bass or that would
Well, I think I
surprise people
mentioned
to
one
learn?
thing already, and that is the contrabass. The fact that we everything we play comes out an octave lower than what we read. The tuba player doesn't have that advantage. And so he has to look at notes that are way down below the staff and read ledger lines all the time. We don't have to do that. But we do have to read three different clefs. We have to read bass clef, which of course for bass, but then we have to read tenor clef, which is an in-between clef when we go higher. And if we go real high, which we can, we even have to read treble clef like violins.
How often do you read treble clef?
Oh, very, very seldom in orchestra. The double bass is actually two different instruments. The instrument that we play most of the time in orchestra is on the lower side. Of course, we're the basses.
Right,
They
you're
need us to
balancing
be the
out the
lowest.
strings family. Yeah.
But when we play solos, people don't want to listen to solo music that low. So we
Or
play clear
exclusively
up
that
at the
low.
top of the
Yeah.
fingerboard and play as high as we possibly can to sound like a cello.
Okay.
So we play treble clef a lot for solos, but very seldom in orchestra. Quite often, if we use harmonics, we'll see it, but that's
Okay.
about the only time.
I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you about repertoire. Do you have a favorite composer for solo repertoire and a favorite composer for orchestral repertoire or a favorite genre or piece that really brings you great joy?
Well, I love French music, and I love
Mm,
to listen to impressionistic French music. I love to play Debussy on the piano, but I don't like to play French music because the bass
interesting.
players always get slow notes and harmonics, and our parts are not very interesting. The violins have a ball with it, but the bass is not so much.
There
I
was
think if you asked any bass player what their favorite is, it would probably be ball because we get so much to do.
okay, you have to say that again because the internet cut you out, so I want the audience to be able to hear it.
Okay, my favorite composer to play is Gustav Mahler.
Gotcha.
And I think most bass players would agree with me, and probably Beethoven and Brahms come in second and third.
It's just such rich textures of music. Um, are there are there any living composers or new composers that have different or interesting techniques that are not the standard techniques? Or is it just kind of the range of motion when you're doing more solo stuff?
I love John Adams and his pieces because of what he does rhythmically
Mm,
and what he does texturally inside the orchestra, the sounds that he gets, that he's thought of ways to use the instruments in the orchestra that had never been done before. And so you get these incredible sounds that you've never heard before. And rhythmically, he can make the orchestra just breathe.
yeah.
And that's really challenging to play and count, but it's
Yes.
also very rewarding. Um, I think of one piece, Short Ride on a Fast Machine by John Adams is a perfect example of what I'm talking about.
Hmm. Um, I would love to allow people to imagine themselves on the stage because when you're in the hall, you hear kind of the whole of the orchestra and it all comes out to you, hopefully in a very unified sound. When you're on stage, what do you hear? You're
We
at the
hear,
very front.
yes, I'm at the very front edge. And so, but think about how far away I am from the last stand of violins.
Hmm.
I probably don't hear them at all directly. Whatever I get from them comes out of the hall and back off the back wall of the hall to me, which means it's getting to me about a half a second after it gets to the people in the audience. So you have to adjust to that. And it's one of the ways that I can judge a singer when we play with singers.
Hmm.
When that singer turns towards the audience and opens up, if I can hear that voice come off the back wall and I can hear it plain as day,
Hmm.
that he or she has a great voice because it's
Interesting.
just projecting and reflecting.
Hmm. Um, do you hear the timpani from where you're sitting?
Oh yes, he's right behind us, and so he's quite present. Anything, and we like that because we have to play with him so often. We don't have any time delay with him at all. Percussion are on the other side, and so we have a little time delay to what they. I mean, if a snare drum plays, everybody hears it.
Hmm.
We get just a fraction of a second behind when everybody else does. And that's why we hear the maestro say constantly, play on the stick, on the stick. You've got to be on the stick. You can't play with what you hear. Because if you
It's
play with what you hear, you're late.
it's so counterintuitive to tell a musician don't listen. Um, but I think when he's saying that, he means you have to listen in a different way and you have to tune your ears to where you are, in the physical space on the stage. There are some orchestras, I mean, our setup is the way that Maestro Polachek really loves to have it. There are some orchestras where the percussion are in a big row on the back. There are some orchestras where the timpani are on the other side. So there's that low coming from both sides. But I think that Ed really loves from what you were just saying, because you and the timpani anchor that low end of the sound. He wants you together and he wants there to be zero time delay so that you guys can really, and also the tuba is right there in that triangle too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that works very well. Sometimes I've played as in other orchestras, I've played with what's called the European seating, where the basses actually, the first violins and second violins are seated across from each other on the
mm-hmm,
front of the stage. And the cellos are on the same side with the seconds,
mm-hmm.
and the violas are on the same side with the firsts, and the basses are behind the first violins.
Yep, yep.
And that's a completely different, when we're like that, you have to listen in a completely different way. I mean, you can really hear those firsts finally, but you can't hear some of the people you really need to hear.
It takes time, and I think I listened to an acoustics consultant who had built a new hall, and he was talking about those last few weeks where they were they call it tuning the hall. They had sound clouds that they were kind of adjusting and different things, and the orchestra was, in the new space for the first time. And he said the first week the orchestra was all complaining, we can't hear each other, we can't hear each other. And he said by the third week, they were saying, oh, thank you for making that adjustment yesterday. I can now hear what my colleague, is. And he said
Exactly.
that was your ear that was making that adjustment. You have,
Yep.
it's your body learning the space as well as,
Yep.
becoming accustomed to it.
I helped in the process when they tuned the Holland, when they built it in
Mm,
Omaha.
yep.
So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's such an interesting process. I'm fascinated by the acoustics. It's such an interesting blend of science and art. The sound waves travel the way that waves travel, and also, our ears can adjust. Anyway, that's a little off topic. We only have a couple minutes left. This time has flown, but I just wanted to hear from you. Do you have any favorite memories of playing in Lincoln's Symphony Orchestra, or any favorite performance memories or offstage memories?
Oh, I have, there's been so many. it's hard to pick out one particular time or I think some of the memories that I have that stick out the most are actually more related to the students that I've had that have come through the orchestra. I really remember things about that more than I do individual experiences.
This is unfair to ask, but do you know how many of your students have played in the orchestra, either in the Young Artist Competition as winners or um, getting contracts in the orchestra?
I have had two students that were young artist winners.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, both Eric Higgins and Anish Mitra.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a total of 7 students that
Wow.
have played in the orchestra either while they were still in high school or in their first year or two of college, as soon as
What
they graduated from high
what a
school.
legacy to pass down, Mike. I want to just take a moment to let you tell us what you do in your, or what you did, you're now retired, in your day job for all these years.
Well, I was a string specialist with the Lincoln Public Schools, which means that I conducted high school orchestra and middle school orchestra and taught lessons to elementary kids. And I mean, started them right from the very beginning in fourth grade and taught all of the stringed instruments, including violin, viola, and cello. And that was my day job. And I did that for 33 years
Wow.
and very much enjoyed that. Um, when you asked me about the memories with the orchestra, there's
Hmm.
one that I want to tell in particular, if I could.
Yeah, of course.
I'm proud to be the teacher of the youngest member ever to be accepted and given a contract in the Lincoln Symphony Orchestra, and that is Eric Higgins, who runs the Crossroads Music Festival now
Yes.
and is in Aarhus, Denmark, and gifted double bass player and world musician. And when Eric was 14, he won the International Society of Bassists worldwide competition on solo competition on double bass. And in that same year, in September, he auditioned for Lincoln Symphony Orchestra. And as you know, auditions are behind a curtain so that no one can see.
Committee knows nothing about the applicant.
No, no, you can't tell if it's a man or a woman or a child in this case.
Wow.
And so he played. There were 3 people auditioning that day, and the others. We after we listened to all the auditions, the consensus among the committee was that number 3 was really the best and probably was good enough to be given a contract. And Ed turned to me and said, "Mike, well, we're all talking about this, but you're the bass player on the committee, and you're not talking." And I said, "Well, Ed, it's because I know who number 3 is. And I don't want to say anything until I get consensus from everybody else. But if you all agree, I would concur. I think number 3 should be given a contract. But if we do that, you need to know that you've just hired somebody that's very young." And he said,
Wow.
"Well, what do you mean very young?" And he got sarcastic with me. And I said, "Well, very young." And he said, "Well, what do you mean, 12?" I said, "No, 14." You should have seen his mouth drop.
There is
Eric,
something there's something so special about the relationship that a music teacher has with their students. And somehow you have this special gift of mentoring bass players. And I mean, really, to have 7 of your former students have contracts with the orchestra is, I think, really remarkable. And it's a testament to you as a mentor as well. So,
I think the greatest reward a teacher can have is when he has students who go beyond
hmm,
what he has accomplished personally. And I'm very proud to say I have several who have done that.
wow.
Um, Eric Higgins is one. Sam Beck Johnson is also in Aarhus, Denmark,
Yep.
playing there. And probably the greatest of all is Sam Locke, who is now the principal double bassist in the National Arts Center Orchestra in Ottawa, Canada. That's the
Wow.
top job in Canada.
It's
And
incredible.
so, yeah, but the ones that have gone on and that are still just playing, even if they're just in community orchestras, they're just as important too.
It's
I
very
mean, for
special.
all of them.
Well, congratulations and congratulations on your many years with the orchestra. And thank you so much for talking with me today. It
Well,
was really
thank
fun.
you. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.